Hello and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss The Void, which came out in 2016, written and directed by Jeremy Gillespie and Stephen Kostanski. So this is a film that came out, 4 years ago now?
Yeah.
And it pretty much went under the radar as well because there wasn't many trailers for it, many advertisements for it. It was word of mouth that carried this film as far as it did, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be far enough.
No, I think it got a review in the Empire, but like in the UK, that's obviously a big magazine, film mag, but I hate to say that the paid print age has passed, so...
We're relying on the internet
yeah.
and fans of the horror genre
Yeah.
to pass it around. Now, this film had a real troubled production. All of the practical and visual effects budget was crowdsourced. And that was because they had different financiers contributing to the film. But once they had their location, which was an abandoned school, and partly an abandoned hospital, which they retrofitted to make it look...
like one building, yeah.
Exactly. But once they actually started, they were a day before principal photography was due to take place, and one of the financiers pulled out of the project, and they had to shelve everything. The cast and crew just kind of stood around whilst they had to go and finance the film again. And during production, they were also shut down several times, either because the money ran out, or because of bad weather, or because the power to the whole building just would go out.
Well, it's always fun to have a bit of a horror show making a horror show.
Well, from interviews with the cast and crew making the film, it was an absolute nightmare. Now, this isn't the first time I've seen these guys work either. Earlier, Ian and I reviewed Manborg, which was made on a budget of about $10,000, and it looked like it. It looked like a student-grade movie, but it had a heart, it had passion behind it. And I didn't realize that the two of these had worked with Guillermo del Toro. They worked on a vast range of movies, and these two have special effects backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I always champion special effects creators, but not always does it work when they take the director's seat.
No, it's always a risk when you're kind of bringing somebody who's a pure arts guy into a more full structure of film making.
For me, my biggest argument with that is the Alien vs. Predator Requiem, where it was the two brothers, massive special effects guys, cannot argue against their effects. It's fantastic work, but as soon as they take the director's chair, it turns to shit.
Yeah, and that's the issue. I mean, it's like Requiem, again, beautiful. It's beauty. They know how to set a shot. They know how things can be set up in a magnificent way. Well, even though again, Requiem was a flawed film, but if you look at certain sequences in a vacuum, you're like, well, that's beautiful. But then the film as a whole is a bunch of very pretty pieces of a puzzle that isn't coming together.
Well, speaking of a puzzle coming together, Jess, why don't you give us the synopsis for The Void?
Well, it's a horror film. You open outside a house, and a man bursts from the door and runs into the wilderness. A young girl follows, but she gets shot down and then burned alive, which is obviously a beautiful opening to any film. From there on, you then move on to the man running through the forest and eventually being discovered by a police officer. And from there, that police officer takes him very kindly to a hospital. And then events unfold at the hospital. You introduce to all the medical staff and other important cast members, and the horror begins to unfold within.
So right up off the bat, we get the impression that there is some kind of cult behind this, especially right at the beginning as the credits start. You see the figure in the white robe with the triangle, the black pyramid, I guess,
yes,
for its centerpiece. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how those guys see through that mask, but yeah.
Yeah, it's the mystery, but there's a lot of mystery and a lot of unanswered questions, which I think is the nature of good horror. You only ever kind of touch the fringes of madness. You never quite see the whole picture, even at the end.
Especially if you're dealing with cosmic horror. And this film, it doesn't really let you in on that from the get-go.
Yeah.
It's kind of as the characters explore their surroundings and the horrific things happen to them that you start to realise that there is a lot more going on than some bizarre mutilations.
Yeah.
But the first sort of 20, 25 minutes of the film, we get introduced to our cast of characters. we have Aaron Poole playing Daniel Carter, who picks up the stranger and takes him to the hospital.
Yeah.
We're also introduced to Kenneth Welsh, who plays Dr. Powell.
Yes, he's important.
A very important character. We also have Daniel Fathers, who plays the father. He was the one we saw at the beginning burning the lady alive.
Yes.
Along with Mick Biscoff, who plays the son. And we're introduced to Kathleen Munroe, who plays Alison Fraser. And we soon realise that Carter and Alison have a history together. They are married and they're having issues after they lost their child in unknown circumstances. The child has died either in childbirth or through something, which has caused some friction between these two characters.
It again unwinds through the story in its own unpleasant way.
We also have two other characters. We have an old man and his granddaughter who's currently pregnant, waiting to see a doctor. We're also introduced to one of the nurses and one of the other patients who's currently watching Night of the Living Dead on the television. I do like that nod there. And also, I don't know if you're aware of, but there are two actors in this film from previous George A. Romero zombie films. Yeah, the shitty one, Survival of the Dead. The main character, Flynn, is the good doctor in this film. And Alison was that character's daughter in those movies as well. So, yeah, we round out the cast with a bunch of faces that you may or may not recognize from TV or straight-to-video movies, but there's no one really that recognizable.
But they're all reasonably good actors, I think.
I would say that all of the acting in the film is really good. Nobody lets it down.
No, there's nothing too bad. Again, it is all pretty darn good acting. I think initially I was a bit off-put by the guy who rescues from the forest right at the start. But outside of that, I think I kind of grew and understand he was playing a panicked man who was terrified, absolutely terrified.
Yeah, I think that character is Jake, and his character is revealed to us when the father and son turn up at the hospital, and they're threatening to kill him immediately because unknown reasons. Yes. He escaped the house where they were killing people. Yeah. It's almost like, okay, so did he murder them? Was he part of the cult? Are they part of the cult? Who's after who? And all the while you have Carter, who's trying to be the hero of the situation, but he ain't no Kurt motherfucking Russell.
No.
And so he just gets knocked out and bashed in by almost everybody.
Well, off the bat, he gets into the hospital, and you've got the sequence where he finds the nurse, shall we say, dealing with one of our shortest-lived members of the cast.
Yes.
The man who was unfortunately watching a good film.
Yes, yeah. He has a scalpel, or it's a pair of scissors embedded in his head.
Yeah.
As I think it's Dr. Beverly or Nurse Beverly who's pulling them out.
Yeah.
This isn't my face.
What the?
This isn't my face.
Yeah, this isn't my face. And she tries to peel it off, and then goes at our good police officer with
the pair of scissors. He threatens her to stop, but he ends up gunning her down, which of course alerts everybody else who just sees this carnage. And I'm like, well, they're immediately going to accuse him of just murdering this nurse for no good reason, despite there is a corpse in the bed.
But then he promptly collapses, and then you get the kind of... They do this a few times where they kind of fade away and leaves more confusion. Now, the script gets a little bit... I think the opening first half is really, really good, but it gets a bit ropey near the end because they keep doing this, where you kind of have these fades where everything gets chaotic, which is awesome for keeping you off kind of balance as a viewer, but I think it gets a bit carried away. But in the initial part, it's a clever fade where he kind of hits the floor, then wakes up, and he's trying to get his bearings on what he's just done, because I imagine he hasn't shot many people.
Yeah, well, he runs off to the bathrooms and vomits.
Yeah.
And I was like, now, this film is very light in the character development, and there's only really his character that gets, I guess, the most development throughout the film because he's on screen more.
Yeah.
That the actors aren't really given that much to do, which is why I would say the performances are good, but no one excels because there isn't, it's kind of them just reacting, and they kind of mostly have the same panicked reaction.
Yeah.
Now, the directors have said that, yeah, they kind of had a script, but when it came to shooting, they kind of had to throw it out the window because they had a very tight time schedule. They didn't have all the funding that they wanted. Lots of, interfering aspects just resulted in them going, look, here's the script. We're going to film you practicing it just in case that works better than your actual delivery. and you need to kind of improvise bits and pieces. And the characters, the actors, they got into their parts, and so again, even though they shot a lot of the film out of sequence, they did a very good job at escalating their reactions, because seeing something horrific right at the start, you'd think, somebody's just peeled their face off and attacked and killed somebody else. But no, things are going to progressively get worse, and the way that the characters panic throughout the film, and it's done very well.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. I think some characters get underused a little, especially I say this about Kim, the Asian nurse, the young girl at the start. She kind of she is panicked through a lot of this because she's young, isn't a great nurse by the looks of it, is taking it rather too easy.
Bit of an attitude at the beginning.
But you don't get development with her particularly because she's just sidelined almost for a lot of the film, and I feel it feels like there's bits of script that I can see where bits were cut, like the book that he picks off the doctor's table.
Yes, that's
and that was a cool looking book, an interesting object they'd made for the whole movie. It felt like that was going to be important.
Well, because the film doesn't reveal its lore, watching the film, you can easily go, oh, I see elements of John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, and John Carpenter's The Thing, and John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness.
Yeah,
but you also see elements of Clive Barker's Hellraiser. The director's massively influenced by Silent Hill and probably Resident Evil.
It's all the eldritch horror that's clearly sourced, all comes from H.P. Lovecraft's greater works, but it's just bleeding through, and it's a multi-leveled homage on many levels, but outside of that it is also a lot more kind of, it's just an 80s movie almost in its
it's very much so 80s in its look, in its visual aesthetic. The fact that they have those telephones, those radios, it is, because it's one of those things where when it came out, there was a lot of movies that were doing, it's a throwback to 80s horror movies with CGI, and it's like, you missed the fucking point.
There's no point in having a kind of horror film where you're not feeling like blood splattering on people's faces. I think the human mind can tell when something's dripping rather than something's being digitized.
Right.
At least for now. Maybe one day we'll all be tricked. But right now, it does feel like somehow the rubber monster, although the monsters aren't that bad. I mean, they're really quite good in most shots. They're not hidden. They're in strong lighting a lot of the time.
Well, there is a sequence where I think it's one of the sheriffs. He turns up, and I recognize the actor. He's a legendary actor who's got an IMDb list that's a mile long. And he turns up. He's sort of a very minor role, as he is the first character to be killed.
Yeah, the U.S. Marshal.
The U.S. Marshal, and he kind of takes control of the situation, and then, of course, you kill that guy off straight away so that everyone, ends up in chaos. But the shot is, you see the monster behind him, which I'll get into in a minute. It's a fantastic monster. But then in the next shot, he's being dragged away, and the monster's much further away, and you're like, was there a shot or two there that should have been there, that was edited, or did they run out of money and didn't do that? And so that type of jump cut, it's a little bit annoying, but it's not something you catch straight away when you're first watching the film, because you're reacting with the other characters just like, what the fuck is that?
Well, there's another shot that interested me, which was when the son is... Man, I'm skipping ahead. Right near the end, where he has to burn the monster off his dad.
Yeah.
Without saying too much, his dad ain't going to make it either. But behind him, there's a woman holding a baby.
Yes, their mother.
Yeah. And then she disappears off the scene. And it's these subtle sequences where I feel like maybe there was more they were going to do, or have more sequences of that haunting the both of them.
Yes.
I mean, and it's just these wonderful sequences. And it's subtle. It took me a second pause and kind of retake when I saw
it makes
that.
you wonder whether they are physically actually there, or whether they are just mental manifestations of their psyche.
But he never acknowledges her, so
no,
it's purely for the...
But earlier in the film, when the pregnant lady is in pain, they split up. Carter takes one team outside to the police car, which is moved all the way down the other end of the parking lot.
Suspiciously, but...
So it's either the cultists moved the car, or the entity, the void, has shifted it. Yeah. But Alison is separated, and she goes off to wander and find the medical supplies. And you see the doctor in the doorway, just a glimpse of him, where you get the musical stinger as well. And I'm like, so again, that's not a physical manifestation, because the body where he was put down is gone.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's the classic horror trick where you're seeing things. It's like in Exorcist 3 with the old lady going across the ceiling.
Yes.
It's the principle that it's meant to make us jump. It's not a jump scare in its purest sense, because it's subtle. And that's the thing, the difference between a jump scare and actual more subtle horror is things kind of creep up on you and you have to take a second look to realise it's there, rather than a jump scare where it's just jumping at the centre of the screen. These are all very well placed, I feel, and that's one of the positives of this. I think the whole film's very good, but these are one of the clever things they're doing where you're looking and you can watch this a couple of times and I think you pick up on more things. We may have missed things, and this is obviously the trick of the interweb. I'm sure the comments will tell us if we missed anything, but there's so many cool little snippets of their kind of foreshadowing they do really well in this, I think.
Well, like Kim saying, statistically, you've got more chance of dying in a hospital than anywhere else.
Yeah, and they do, it's not a comedy. I know a lot of their earlier works were comedies, these films.
Absolutely, yeah. This was the first time where they were like, let's make a bloody, gory, visceral, brutal horror movie that's unforgiving in its details.
Yeah, because we don't get good Cthulhu-esque films very often.
We do nowadays, thank
yeah,
Cthulhu.
I haven't yet seen Cage's new
Color Out of Space.
Yeah,
it's also fantastic and is a perfect blend of practical effects and CGI. These horror movies, they work on an extra level when you have that visceral, realistic, believable, authentic monster on screen.
Absolutely.
And like we said, that nurse that has mutated into this thing, like you can see the human shape in the front, and it's just shadowy mucus, muscle, bone, and horrificness behind it.
There's so many good monsters though,
and it's tentacles. It's always with the tentacles going in through the mouth, the
punching
eyes,
through the chest later on.
Punching through the chest. I'm like, is that its way of feeding? Because I don't really see a mouth on this thing.
Or are they corrupting and assimilating? It's
exactly.
Tough to say.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be easily answerable because you as the viewer are meant to kind of walk away with your own version.
I can only say that if you're coming into this film from outside of the horror genre, then you'd be like, why is this happening? If you come into this film like knowing John Carpenter and knowing H.P. Lovecraft, you're just like, what? Does it matter? It's coming from the great unknown.
Yeah, I can see why some people might have a harder time consuming this, but the review, it still received a fairly warm critical absorption. But again, I suspect it was being aimed at the right audience with who they were showing it to.
True, yeah. Maybe the horror monster audience is like dwindled down, so there's not that many of us left.
No. Well, again, I would say, like I said, I've dug through, and I think there were a few positive articles in larger publications like Empire. I think Empire gave it 3 out of 5 or something like that, and that's a pretty good. It's a good film. That's their idea of a good, entertaining romp, and as a homage to an era of films which we don't get anymore because we're in the age of Marvel and blockbusters.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like there's no more surprises left. Like the horror genre has tapped into everything that's conceivable, possible to put on screen.
Yeah, we're in the age of remakes now mostly, and rehashes, and we're going to get a new Hellraiser soon. And,
of course. Well, just rehash. Well, everything's been rehashed.
All that's like yearly, though. I think with Hellraisers, almost feels like it.
We'll probably end up like Child's Play, where we have the Hellraiser franchise being carried on by Miramax, whoever, plus Clive Barker's remake TV series, just like Child's Play's split copyright.
There's a few good gems like this that crop up, but it does feel like we live in an age where there's just so many films that
do you think the film's title didn't really do it any favors?
Yay and nay. I think the film's title is one of the... I wouldn't call this film super deep, but it is dealing with a few issues woven within it, and I think the title is an intentional play on the void within you when someone passes, and that is the whole deeper meaning to this film. It isn't a film that digs too deep on its kind of
on a surface level. It is about reincarnation and rebirth.
Yeah,
because you have 2 pregnant ladies. You end up with a fetus monster.
Yeah,
and it is about the doctor who had also lost his child. He was trying to bring her back to life, as well as dying and coming back to life.
One of the 2 people that survived was the son of the father. And the point is, he saved his child in some way. So you end up with a kind of... It's parents and children. So you've kind of got the void that's left when your children die before you, which is in the case of the primary antagonist, the doctor, and the protagonist. They're both men who have lost children. Different points, different lives, different people, and they deal with it incredibly differently, you might say.
Yeah, because our good doctor decides, well, I'm just going to delve into the occult.
Yeah, why not?
I lost my daughter to the abyss. But tonight, I am calling her back.
Richard, please, don't do this.
like I said, yeah, it's dealing with it. The primary issue, and I think you're right, the title probably didn't make sense to passing by, but then again, there's so many titles you could say that about. I think the title shouldn't define a film. The Shining, what the hell does that mean to anybody? It's one of the best horror films I've ever made, which is, I think, generally universally accepted. Kubrick was genius, but that film was particularly good in my opinion. But...
Yeah, I don't know. It's like The Void as a title. It kind of feels like it would have been also an 80s movie, and it's kind of surprising that no
Very
film
much
has
so.
picked up that title before. And so when you hear The Void,
Yeah.
it doesn't also sound like a new film either.
No, definitely feels it's fresh. The whole thing is fresh but old. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's a breath of fresh air from the 80s.
So one of my other criticisms, it's not really a criticism to say, is that a lot of the characters kind of yell and scream at each other, and it's because no one really knows what's going on, except the father and the son, who know what's going on, but don't trust anybody, so won't tell anybody what's going on, and never do.
No.
They kind of eventually trust Carter because he's got the shotgun.
Well,
He's calling the shots.
Initially, you're not sure how monsters are becoming monsters.
No. There's no
And
explanation
there's
for it
voices
either.
in people's heads, and you have both Carter and the father both suffer from this.
Yes.
To different outcomes. But it does obviously appear that the transformations are very much tied to our good doctor.
Yeah.
And the nurse, I assume, had been working with the doctor for a long time, so why she became what she became, it was all
Yeah,
preset
but
in
you
motion.
never see the doctor, raise the cult, interact with the cult, who the members are they human underneath? The fact that
don't
it's a
even see-
bare bones hospital as well, and the fact that when we do get into the basement, we realise that the doctor has done countless numbers of experiments, all about reanimating the dead or bringing the dead back to life.
And the hospital's being shut down, and it turns out there was a fire, and it obviously the doctor reveals that yes, accidentally he burned half the hospital to the ground in his continued Machiavellian schemes.
Yes. And so his motive for all of the horrors was that he wanted to bring his daughter back.
It's remove death.
Remove death. But we also find out that the pregnant lady that was there with her grandfather, she's the mother of the doctor now, of their newborn baby.
Some horror show, obviously. It's not a normal baby. That would have been serene and weird. But
Well,
nonetheless.
it's one of those things where it's like she's there at the altar, praying with him to open this dimensional gateway or whatever it is at this point, and she's all for it. But then the moment he's just like, yeah, okay, now you're going to give birth to my reanimated daughter, she freaks the fuck out.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
that's the
so
point.
was she brainwashed? Was she a part of the cult? Did she know this was going to happen? Why is she
Yeah.
now in pain
Again,
and agony? And
you're
it's like,
right.
so was she mentally manipulated? We don't know. Again, I would also just go, yeah, I would say that she completely was. And because horror is horror, the moment that the birth sequences is happening, the brainwash has been taken off, you get to experience the bloody awful end of your life. And it's just like, yeah, that's cruel.
And then it drags her along behind her.
Now I'm like, I partially found it funny that the corpse was being dragged along by the umbilical cord. But it's darkly comedic.
It's
But
got- yeah.
in a film that's been so brutal, you kind of, I don't know, I guess you kind of want to laugh.
It's I think laughter is the coping mechanism, but certainly
Right.
and it's good horror. It's good horror for that point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's taking it to that edge where you've kind of got good horror sits on the edge of farce.
Right.
Because the best comedy horrors are just farcical.
Yes.
Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, the wood chipper sequence,
Right.
absolute comedy gold because it goes too far.
Yes.
But that's fine because it embraces that and has a pacing and a structure. Good farce. Farce is probably, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to pull off successfully.
Yeah.
Because you've got to
It's the self-awareness and
and the maintaining the pace.
Yeah.
Because if you've got high phonetic, outlandish sequences going on regularly, it's almost hard to kind of keep the flow of the audience's laughter, because at a certain point you're just going to become too much or too little, and farce is difficult. But in this sits on the edge of that. It does the right thing by not going too much into it, and her horrified realization of what she's just birthed and her death then being dragged along. It's just on the edge. I think it's perfect.
yeah, it really, really is well done. You know, everything is kind of escalated and turned its dials up to 11 at this point, where you've got these freakish abominations going around. But Carter has also been stabbed in the back. I mean, he got stabbed in the chest earlier. Now he's got a knife in his back.
He's
pretty messed up, and
yeah.
he gets knocked out and stabbed repeatedly. But the fetus monster has chased off the boy
and killed. I think it killed some of the cultists that were around as well.
It might
Because
be.
remember, there were two cultists standing either side of the doctor when Carter entered that room.
Yeah.
And again, never interact with him, which I like.
Right.
The faceless cultists. It's very haunting.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah. Just a bit of trivia for you is that, you know, the film is like 90% practical effects, but there are digital effects that were done that are almost seamless, and the majority of the cultists were all duplicated from one or two actors in the costume, and a lot of them were also digitally altered because it either rained or it was windy, and they just couldn't get the shots right.
Yeah,
but
that's amazing.
they managed to pull that off quite well.
It's endearing in a sense they've had to use CGI, but only sparingly,
Yeah.
and only to fix a problem they couldn't do live action,
Yeah.
which it absolutely couldn't.
And some of the lighting effect here as the portal is opened through the triangle. There was still a physical set. That whole area was the old school gymnasium,
Yeah.
which they converted into a set, and it is fantastic.
I
You
know.
really believe it was a real thing, a real cult gathering.
It was very the bit where the nurse is directing them through the hospital and they explain stairs down, and you kind of get the cutout which you realize there shouldn't be stairs down.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, what's going on here? And it's the classic mist at the bottom of a descending stairwell. There are a few tropes in play here. This film is, as we said, a homage to many things. And you've got the mad scientist, you've got to think mad doctor, seeking eternal life, defying death. You think yourself a god? No, I'm just defying God. You know, there's some wonderful use of old school tropes, but again, I think they use sparingly and almost all in the finale, which I quite like the finale.
Yeah, the film does feel like it's been saving up its kind of money shots, its final money shots for this moment.
The finale's beautiful, yeah.
And so Carter ends up at the altar with the doctor, and the doctor explains that he can reunite him with his wife. And Carter's just like, you know what, fuck it. And he throws himself and the doctor through the portal.
Into this kind of other world, which you've seen in sort of dream sequences. Again, this is where the whole thing gets a little bit sketchy, because earlier in the film you've kind of seeing shapes in kind of cosmic clouds and almost otherworldly vistas, but you weren't sure until the closing sequence, where you kind of, as you said, Carter throws himself through and you arrive.
Yeah. And the boy then, he escapes. The fetus creature is killed as the walls, or sorry, the tunnel between the dimensions is closing.
Yeah,
and he escapes
killing
through.
the good doctor's daughter. She was such a beautiful girl.
Indeed. But the final moments of the film, the final seconds, is Carter and his wife Alison in the unknown.
Yeah, in this kind of ancient black kingdom of kind of...
It is a void, again, of nothing but strange shapes in the sky, and you see the giant pyramids that are just black obelisks in the sky.
And one massive pyramid rising up in front of them, and you just pan up to
they hold hands, which is a great little moment that, you know, the two of them, they've only got each other now. The fact that they've also found each other in such a short amount of time, and the fact that the doctor isn't present, you know, you don't think of that straight away because you're still just trying to grasp, like they are, where the fuck are they, and are we going to get a sequel?
Yeah.
Which, you know, it's one of those films which you just don't do. You don't make sequels to films like that.
You could maybe, if you're smart, make another film, it's very clearly not connected, and then suddenly you just drop a sprinkle of something that says, well, maybe it's the same universe.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, it's beautiful, and again, it's very spiritual, because again, she's physically dead. He jumped through a portal to somewhere else, but they're together, looking fairly healthy.
Yeah.
So again, it's the kind of
like, did
what
he
is
die
real,
as
what
well,
is
or...
not real. And it's the blurring of that, which again, good horror. The only bit you know that's real is because just prior to that, you have the son return to the real world as the door, as you said, the kind of doorway shutting, crushing the monster that was the daughter of the good doctor, and he staggers back out and then encounters Kim, and the two of them are like, she's like, is it over? And he's like, yes. Well, he doesn't say anything, because we should make it clear, this is something I probably didn't mention up to now. He's had his throat cut, we assume, by a cult attack earlier in the film, prior to the start of the film. But you never quite get everything from that. And again, maybe losing some of the script along the way has benefits, because I like the kind of mysterious, voiceless protagonist he becomes in his own little way in it.
Yeah.
Because he is probably almost the secondary character, because he's there through almost every scene in the film.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't speak, you kind of forget him, but he is there in every shot and is absorbing and seeing the horror of what's going on, having to end his own father's life in the sequence. Just as the daughter summons and kills the pregnant girl, they're standing outside, which is the only jarring bit I would actually add.
Sure.
The bit where you go from the mortuary kind of slaughterhouse sequence where they're in to the gymnasium sequence, as you say, which is the temple. Should we say the temple sequence where they jump through the portal? It feels like they were different sets.
Right.
That's the only time I felt you were in two different rooms.
Yeah.
And that's the only time I felt I think that's the only time I felt I could see glaring budget issues.
Sure.
Because I felt like there should have been a little bit more to explain the traversal of that monster through the facility.
Yeah.
Just my thing. That was the only real criticism I could pick out was that transition. I still thoroughly enjoyed it for all those little nitpicks.
So what were your favourite moments, or least favourite moments in the film?
My least favourite moment, sort of the opening. It just felt something off. I can't describe it, but the opening, I know what they were trying to do. Once I got into the hospital and met the cast and it started rolling, I felt everything flowed nicely through it.
Okay.
But I felt just a little jarring in the first 5-10 minutes. And then I got into
maybe should have just started with with Carter in the police car finding this person running.
Yeah, maybe because it just felt like there was almost a low grade quality to that opening.
Yeah.
Where I felt the rest of the film carried itself, ignoring the budgetary issues we know what happened. It didn't feel like it.
Sure.
I think they did really, really well half the time.
Favourite part of the film?
Honestly, I think it's just the opening bit where Carter finds the nurse who's just killed the patient, and then she lunges at him. I just felt that was just well played. You've put me off kilter now, and it kind of, they did that well, and I think that rolled the entire film into a nutshell of being a rolling horror show, because I like human horror where she's kind of just gibbering like a lunatic, and then he has to put her down, but then his humanity shows that he didn't, there's no pleasure in death.
No. I mean, he could have shot her in the kneecaps, but
Yeah, but then again, that's what I'd say. So he's a rookie cop, not rookie cop in the sense he's clearly done it for a few years, and you get references to his father, which is never explored. But
it's just another one of those layers, like we've said about parenthood.
His father was a cop before him, by the sounds of it. That's all you get through conversations with the doctor. And he may not be cut out for this, or he may have just never encountered any need to fire his gun. A lot of police officers, contrary to the negative stereotypes of North America, rarely fire their guns at people.
Sure.
A lot of, it's a tough business when they actually have to. So I liked that. It just it was jarring, and it set everything up, and it was Cthulhu. Because it's what I love about Cthulhu is the mind games it's playing with you, and the doctor's playing mind games throughout the film. Like, I'll put a secondary one. When they're in the office and he's ringing his own office, and Carter picks up the phone to the doctor who he thought was dead, but now he's very much aware he's not.
Calling from the morgue. Yeah.
Calling from the morgue, which may or may not be where the morgue once was because dimensional shifting.
Yeah.
And then you've got the book, which I will again grumble about because it was a cool prop. It sets up something for the father, because the father's with him at the time, and leads to nothing.
Yeah. No.
He puts it in his pocket, and then
it never comes out
dies
again
an hour later.
Yeah. It was an idea. It was just to show that this doctor is the villain of the piece.
Or it was a plot device for something that got cut.
Sure, it could have been. Yeah.
But anyway, what was your bit?
There are so many memorable moments in the film, and being a massive fan of practical monster effects, the Beverly monster, just wow, like that. The form of the human skin in front of this giant bloated creature, this brain thing coming out of the top of it, which they blast away. Guts, blood and entrails and tentacles and gore. Oh my.
And these creatures that can't kill themselves. Like, there's a sequence near the end where one's hammering its head into this post, and it's a hole through its entire head, and it won't die. No. And the doctor's making references to these things. I won't let them die.
No, I was just like, the existential nightmare of being that soul.
trapped.
monster die.
Yeah, and it's the Doctor. It's proper mad scientist stuff,
Oh, yeah.
mixed with cults, and it's just great. The monster
Yeah.
effects are awesome.
Yeah, I'd say all of the basement monsters were fantastic. The fetus monster, oh my fucking god, that creature was frightening. Like, it almost looked like the Brundlefly in places, like the head and the eyes.
We haven't mentioned the Doctor transformed a little bit near the end as well, and I thought they went for
completely skinned,
yeah, like brown,
but not fleshy, like charcoal,
yeah.
like burnt.
Yeah, like he'd been scorched, sealed, like
Yeah.
seared shut almost.
Right.
Which was awesome. I mean, it kind of it's not quite Pinhead memorable, but it definitely is a cool visual for your final villain transformation. Because
Definitely,
you know,
yeah.
there's certain memorable like Freddy or Pinhead.
Sure.
He was there. I wouldn't say they had that, but I think
He's not going to be an icon. He's not
No,
of
no.
horror, but yeah, it's still a great visual.
yeah, it was a cool
It's a
transformation.
full bodysuit as well, so yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the whole thing. It was pretty darn cool actually. The whole thing.
Yeah. The contortionist monster. When that
Poor
monster gets up and it's the way that its arms and legs and head's all twisting and contorting, like that is the freakiest monster in the film. Really, really is. Just because of its movements, that it's frightening.
It's just otherworldly, and
Yeah.
I think that's again reminds me of like it's the extra sequence. She's backwards and stuff
Yeah.
across the. It's the otherworldly bending of human limb, where
Sure.
it's your limbs almost. You could imagine, which is good body horror.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Jess, do you recommend The Void?
I would soundly recommend it to anyone who loves 80s horror films. Sure, anyone could watch it, but I think it's a horror film that cuts the genre down a bit. It's very 80s, so if you're looking for your jump scares, it's got a couple, but it's not drenched in them.
No.
It's subtle in all its structuring. So it's not a modern horror film. It's very much a film of the 80s. I would recommend it. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm hands down also going to be recommending The Void. It's Lovecraftian cosmic horror at its best. The performances are great all round, although the character development is slightly lacking as it takes a backseat to the visual nightmare that's taking place, and the monsters and effects really take center stage and are to be championed here, as they are all practical and believable. Truly excellent work done on a tiny budget. It's fantastic. The sets were also very well done, and the altar room especially was simplistic but so effective. The sound design and music really married well with the visuals to help create that dread and unease, which helped bring the monsters to life with the wet, squelchy noises and the growls mixed in with that baby crying. It's unnerving and fascinating at the same time. I also acknowledge that I've been personally starved of good new practical monster movies, and am heaping extra praise here as a result. I'd also say that as directors, they did a decent job with the look of the film. It's not as polished as, say, a John Carpenter movie. And if I have one other minor complaint, it's the overuse of the strobe lighting. In particular, during some of the action and monster shots, there's a red strobe light, which it's irritating on the eyes, and it also obscures some of the monster effects, which I'm guessing was the idea. There's only really a few jump scares, which I appreciate, but as a throwback to 80s horror monster films, it also has some of those typical tropes inherited with it, like the phones are dead, the radio is dead, the lights have gone out, it's typical stuff, but it's fine. Otherwise, this is an expertly made indie horror movie that struggled to get made, and hopefully you don't struggle to find a copy and watch this potential cult classic right away. I truly loved it. More of this, please. Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.
I can see it all before me. The infinite astral workings.